Welcome to Believe It or Not, an Interfaith Grand River program. I'm your host, August Edelman, and I'm here today with Michael Clifton, who's from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Is that correct?
You got it right. Well done.
All right. Well, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
So tell me a bit about yourself. Who are you when you're not in this room?
Oh, just when I'm not in this room? So I don't know if there's a short version. I'm a lawyer full-time. I do real estate and particularly condominium law. I've been doing that for over 20 years, and I'm currently on the condo tribunal as well, so I get to adjudicate and mediate some cases. That's my real life. That's not my real life. That's actually my least preferred real life. I'm also involved with Interfaith Grand River, as you know, and Christians Together Waterloo Region, which is largely not doing much these days, but we're still a group. And I run the Strummerfest Music Festival every year in Waterloo, which I often say is the thing closest to my heart. That's not entirely true, but it's amongst the most important things for me that I do.
Well, and I know you're very involved at your church as well.
Yes. I thought that was in this room, so yes, I am very involved in the church.
So tell me a bit about your background. Like, did you grow up in the LDS church?
No. I joined the church when I was just a few months before I turned 18. I had my own family background is a little bit diverse. I mean, within the general Euro white Anglo-Saxon Christian background, but my father was an agnostic. A devout agnostic, if that's a thing. He clung very close to the truth that he didn't know the truth. And so I had that influence growing up, and he loved to argue about religion at times. My mother was Christian, probably more of a Methodist orientation originally, coming out of the part of England that she did, but she was also a spiritualist. So I grew up with the influence of Ouija boards and psychics, and at the same time reading the New Testament. And also, after my parents were divorced, my mother's boyfriend was Catholic. We'd go to Mass at least at Christmas Eve. And so I had a variety of influence there. And then as I got into my teenage years, actually before that, I guess I got very steeped, in a sense, in faith when I was very young. I apparently knew the New Testament stories inside and out from the age of 6 or 7, and could recite them,
Wow.
And the Old Testament stories to some degree. I think they kept me safe from judges, other than Samson, which is a nice hero story, right? But then I took myself to church. I went to Parkway Bible Church in Toronto for many years just on my own. And one of the teachers there ended up becoming one of the priests at St. Marie among the Hurons. So we had, a Catholic Protestant mixture of things going on at the same time as Ouija boards and stuff. So I always had for me, God and spirituality were always critical, central to my life. There was never any doubt for me that God existed, or what nature God took, or what that meant for me. It changed over time. But in my teenage years, then I began to more seriously look at faith and religion, and I was very interested in Buddhism. I did some meditation and yoga, which isn't Buddhist per se, but I just started to get involved with the Eastern religions and their perspectives on the world, and that spiritualism in a Christian sense, the European spiritualism, does sort of bring in those Eastern influences and mixes them with the Christian, not consciously, but it is a mixture of those things. So that was all attractive to me. What's his name? Richard Bach, who wrote Jonathan Livingston Seagull. But for me, his book Illusions was a big influence, with the story of the reluctant Messiah. So again, I was spending my teenage years early on exploring spirituality. And then the Latter-day Saint missionaries showed up. We watched the TV show Mr. Kruger's Christmas with Jimmy Stewart. My mom loves Jimmy Stewart because he reminds her of her dad. But we enjoyed that show, called in for the free record. They said, "Do you want missionaries to come visit?" And I said, "Sure, why not? We're listening to everyone else." So that started me on that journey. We studied with the missionaries for about 16 months. 13,
Wow.
something like that. We went through a number of them, disappointed some of them. I'm rambling on here.
No, go for it. Yeah, it's interesting.
one of the techniques, it's not a technique as such, but one of the practices of Latter-day Saint missionaries, when a person gets to a certain stage in learning and appears receptive, you would invite them to set a date for baptism or to consider joining the church, whichever way the missionaries want to present it. And so they asked me to set a date, and I said, well, I'll set a date for deciding whether I'm going to get baptized. And I chose June of the next year. Their faces fell immediately. That's not what we meant. But anyway, the interesting thing was that I completely forgot about that. And on the exact day that I chose, I want to say it was June 25th, but I don't actually remember that. The exact day that I chose, I ended up just picking up Crime and Punishment for a fun read.
As you do.
I was one of those teenagers. And I can't remember now what it was in the passage, and I never actually completed the book. I should go back and be one of those people who can say I've read it. But something in it convinced me that I should never join an organized religion.
Mm.
And so I made my decision. I was not going to be baptized. So when I passed that on to the missionaries, they got to be disappointed twice. New set of missionaries, though. But so that conviction stayed with me for a while, and then something changed. And it might have been the missionaries and the things we were able to talk about. A new set of missionaries introduced me to more of the doctrine and more of the teachings of the church. When a missionary is teaching the gospel, it's very simple, right? Mm-hmm. You're giving people the basics, and then they can grow from there if they want to. But I think with these missionaries, they realized we'd had the basics 2 or 3 times, and it wasn't clicking for us. It doesn't click for everybody anyway. But so we have 4 main books of Scripture: the Holy Bible, which contains both the Jewish Bible and the New Testament, the Book of Mormon, Doctrine and Covenants, and we've got to think through it, and the Pearl of Great Price. And the Pearl of Great Price is the one that generally they don't bother talking about with people investigating the church, because you have to kind of already be committed to the faith for that book to make sense to you. Okay. It's Joseph Smith's own personal story of how he had his first vision and started the process of building the church. But it's also got his, what we call the inspired translation of the Bible, some of that segment, where he didn't pretend to translate by knowing the languages. He tried to study Hebrew and Egyptian, but he was a 19th century backwater kid, right? But he went through the Bible and sought revelation as to, what's missing here? What other stories do we not know? Or what things need to be clarified or corrected with scribal errors over time, that kind of thing. And that twigged for me. There was a greater depth and spirituality that I was being introduced to. It wasn't just the Christian story. It wasn't just the restoration of the church. It was now, God said more. And there's some beautiful passages there. It talks about the whole expanse of the universe and how we relate as beings to God and to one another. And there's a beautiful passage in the book of Moses where it tells the story of Enoch, where Enoch has a vision of God weeping over the wickedness of man. And I got emotional. Anyway, it's just the beautiful, touching, deeper theology and very, on some levels, very humanistic and yet also mystical and religious. And so that resonated for me. And then I guess at that point I started to take more seriously the potential that this was a spiritual path for me. And I came to the conclusion that I'm not going to know if I don't try. So I've been around other churches. I joined the United Church in the meantime, and as I say, been involved with other communities and groups. Nothing felt like home. Nothing felt like the place to be. This did for the first time. And I had inspiring religious dreams and that kind of stuff that helped to move me. And I sat down with my mother one day and I said, well, I hope it doesn't bother you, but I think I want to get baptized. And she said, oh, thank goodness, so do I.
Oh, really?
So we both joined the church at the same time then. That wasn't the question. I have no idea what we were talking about.
No, that's lovely. That was just, I was just asking a bit about your backstory.
Well,
that's
there's
great.
my backstory.
Yeah.
Okay, there you go.
That's
and since
great.
then, I literally joined the church saying, if it's not true, I'll leave. And that was now 40 and a half years ago.
Wow.
Yeah. Oh, actually, 41. Yeah, 41 years ago.
That's very cool. That's very cool. So you touched on some of the kind of important books and some of the things that sort of drew you in. Now, 41 years later, is there what in your faith is sort of the thing that you carry close to your heart? What's the thing that kind of motivates you and carries you day to day?
Yeah, I don't know if there's one thing in particular, and I'm afraid that whatever I say will sound like what we say a Sunday school answer. But I think the right answer for me is Jesus. I can't say that I was a Christian before I became a Latter-day Saint. I had a Christian heritage. And like I said, I joined the United Church. I've been to Parkway Bible Church. I knew who Jesus was. I knew all the stories. But I didn't truly come to have faith and belief in him until after joining the church. And it wasn't because, now I'm convinced by the theology. It was personal, profound spiritual experiences with and related to him. So basically, he's the only reason I stay faithful, right? And it's not like I have a family tradition I'm living up to. My wife is also a faithful Latter-day Saint, but I'm sure if I said, I don't want to go to church anymore, she'd live with it. Right? She might be mad at me, she might not. She might do the same thing, I don't know. So there's no sort of outward thing that keeps me going to church. I'm a little bit of although I have this ADHD-ish outgoing nature, I'm an introvert. I loved COVID because I got to sit at home in my basement in front of the computer and work and read books or do whatever. I was at home, and going for walks and meeting people was nice, but then I could shut the door and I was peaceful again. So it's not even like I need the community of the church per se, although I appreciate it. So any of the traditional crutches that religion have, I don't really have those. And I am so steeped in the knowledge of my own sinfulness and inability to please God. It's not even like I'm going there to feel good about myself. I feel crappy about myself a lot of the time. But he's real. And I can use all the titles, he's the Savior, Creator, Judge, all that stuff, but it's just him. It's just him. And when I was looking at the questions you had proposed for what might be talked about today, I was just thinking that is the thing. That this is, for me, how I define true Christianity, because what being in the church has given me is a profound personal relationship with Christ, and through him with God, nature, and everyone else, and frankly, it's made me a better person. And I have been a very bad person. And, don't ever talk to my children or my wife about what I've been like at home and in my life over the years. I've been very bad, but I keep getting better. And so, however deep the hole is that I'm in, by following him and relying on him, I'm crawling out of it. And that's a good thing, and I can't be upset about that.
That's interesting. Thank you. So you mentioned that the going to the church physically isn't necessarily where you find community, that it's not something you necessarily crave, but what communities, whether at the church or elsewhere, I don't know how to phrase this, but are there communities in your life that are spiritually meaningful to you, and how do they support you?
Yeah, I think, it's a normal human thing when you find kindred spirits, right? And I certainly find that in Interfaith Grand River, right? It's this group of people who all care about having a meaningful moral life together and bridging differences and getting to know people on a level that's deeper than those superficial divides. I think that's what defines any good community for me. So I find that at Interfaith Grand River. I find it at church to some extent. One of the things of course, we have a shared faith, right? You can't, that brings you together. And so sharing that vision. But when I hear other members at church talk sincerely and openly about their struggles in faith or life or whatever it is, and how we can work together and support one another. It's just a beautiful thing. It's like a beautiful painting, right? It's a gorgeous thing when people bring their hearts and lives together. The other place I find that is in the punk rock community. Punk rockers are a very diverse group. Not always color-wise, it's a lot more white people than others, but in a variety of ways in terms of abilities, personalities, spiritualities. We're very diverse, and yet there is to use the, I guess, not really contemporary word, there's a brotherhood. Is there a generic word for that? You can say brotherhood, sisterhood. Is there like a siblinghood? Just sounds dumb.
Sounds weird. Yeah.
Anyway, there's a connectivity,
Yeah.
and it's fun. And you know what? Punks grow up too, and the image we have is of angry teenagers, but there are angry adults as well. But the anger then matures and refines because they're also, having children. They're also having jobs. They're living their life and yet holding on to those values that attracted them to punk in the first place, which for some is just rebellion, but for others is finding a more meaningful expression of life, in contrast to what society appears to impose on us.
Right.
A society that's full of hatred and greed and corruption. Anyone who doesn't like that has got the right idea. Right? So, and punks collectively don't like that.
Yeah.
Some of them fall into it, but by and large, it's just been another community where we've actually found it spiritually uplifting to be at a punk rock concert.
I totally get that. Because there's a kind of a DIY element to punk as well.
Oh yeah.
Which I think a lot of folks, I know I relate to that, like as someone from a smaller faith where you kind of just make do with whatever you got to do.
Well, and that's a good way to put it, right? It's DIY because it has to be, and being DIY, it's also genuine. All you've got is your own blood and sweat to put into it. So there you go. Yeah, it's very authentic, I guess is the word. Yeah.
Very cool. That's interesting. So do you do music at your church as well?
Well, I'm involved because my wife is currently the music leader, but she's also exceptionally talented. She's a classically trained singer, and she's currently in the Grand Philharmonic Choir, and she's taught music for decades. So I've been forced into the choir. I mean that in the nicest way, right? It's actually interesting. One day she wanted a husband that she could do music with, right? And I didn't play piano. I never did that. So we sang together once. We were at church. She was playing on the piano. We were singing songs together. And the music director at the time walked in the room and said, "Oh, you two, that sounds great. We want you to do something for one of our programs." So that sort of got us started doing duets together, which is kind of like having, well, Pavarotti and John Denver, only I'm not as good as John Denver. But it's like, Marhi is an exceptional singer. I'm not. And punk rock is the greatest thing because I've found my niche. It's where singing well doesn't matter. But anyway, so we started singing. And I actually, with her help, I could get better. And I did we did songs from Phantom of the Opera. We did Gounod's song, what's it called? Anyway, a couple really classic, beautiful Christian hymns we were able to perform together, and that was nice. That was so enriching for me. So in that level, I'm still involved. We don't tend to do duets anymore because since I started performing in a punk rock band, my singing's getting worse. So when I try to sing the hymns, it's coming out a little bit gravelly. My sense of tone isn't as good as it was. So her training's wearing off, or the influence is becoming less than it ought to be. So I'm okay in the choir because I can be dominated by other better voices.
I mean, I think singing, whether or not you consider yourself a good singer or not, it's just fun.
It is, and it's spiritual. I've one day I'll write a talk or a book about this topic, but I when I was studying philosophy, I have 2 degrees in philosophy, and aesthetics was one of the areas I wanted to focus in a little bit, and I came to the conclusion that choral music is the highest of the arts. And for me, the reason is, and I'm a visual artist. I used to paint and draw anyway, and acting was in my family and all that stuff. But in choral music, first of all, singing comes from here. Can't come from anywhere else. You can't hold the paintbrush and sing, right? Like, there's no tool that allows you to sing. It's got to come from within you. It's your own breath. It's your own heartbeat. It's your own muscle working. So you're producing from yourself. That's first. It's the most authentic art in that. That's not the only thing, but anyway, that adds to the authenticity, a depth to that authenticity. And then chorally, you're doing it together. So you're unifying your breath, your voices, your vibrations, and that sort of, on one level, it's a metaphor for spiritual union, but I think it actually helps to create or amplify spiritual union. So and I find it disappointing at church when people sing like this because they're afraid. The ideal is when we all sort of know our parts, we're all comfortable with the music, and we all sing out.
Yeah.
And sometimes we've had that. We've had this area has a good singing culture, right? That's one of the reasons we came to live here. So sometimes in church meetings there has been the opportunity where people have just all sung out, and you can feel that wave of power. Mm-hmm. And you can't confuse that with the Spirit. It's a very human thing that we can all experience, even if we're wicked, evil people and hate God. But if it happens in conjunction with the Spirit, it's an amplifying and enriching experience. It's really beautiful. Mm-hmm. Was that your question? I don't remember. You just
I don't know if it was, but it was lovely. That was lovely. Very interesting. So I don't know a whole lot about the Latter-day Saints Church. I said that wrong. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Do you have to say the whole thing?
They prefer now the short form, the Church of Jesus Christ.
Oh.
Which actually, I'm going to interrupt you.
Please do.
I was thinking about that today. And I'd never thought of it before today. So this is a brand new thought, but I'm sure everyone else has already thought of it. But I had felt uncomfortable saying the Church of Jesus Christ because I thought, there's all sorts of Christian churches. And we add on the of Latter-day Saints because we're later in history than the early day saints, right? But it struck me that a tendency for some churches, like the Lutheran Church where we're meeting today, they're named after their founders. And I realized that is why we choose that name. Although Joseph Smith was the instigator of the institution here on earth, we actually believe literally that Jesus Christ is the founder of our church institution. So not just that he's the inspiration for Christianity for all Christians, but that he actually founded this church. So it's in that sort of legitimate sense that we're simply naming our founder. And it struck me anyway, it's one of our claims.
Very cool.
Like it or not.
Well, okay, so that actually transitions beautifully into what I was going to ask, which is sort of if you can maybe tell us just a little bit about what it means to be an LDS, Latter-day Saint.
Yeah, we use that short form for it, which isn't used arrogantly. I should point out, because there's the tradition of the saints in Christianity, right? And we'll still, I like to use those terms. If I'm referring to the Gospels, I say the Gospel of St. Matthew, and there's no offense at using those terms, but what we mean by it is a person who has been sanctified by Christ by entering into a covenant with God. So it's not, like, it doesn't make me special. I'm not Latter-day Saint because I'm better than anyone. It's just that I've entered into a covenant relationship with God that sanctifies me through the grace of Christ.
Okay.
And so that's all it means. We're just which was the original use of the term in the early church, just followers of Christ. Saints because the atonement sanctifies us, sets us apart. Okay. Right? In much the same way as the covenants of Israel, right? Set you apart. You're God's particular or peculiar people, right? Is that the translation you use? That's
peculiar?
The one in the King James, yeah.
Oh, I'm good with it. Sounds fitting.
It's a great But anyway, so that would be one of the distinct claims of the church. We believe that we're a restoration of Christianity. Not in the sense that Christianity in a generic sense was ever lost, but we believe that certain original teachings and organization of the church were lost over time, and more particularly that the priesthood authority was lost. So the Catholics would contend with us on this, and the Orthodox, but I think all other religions or all other sects of Christianity sort of have to accept, we don't really have the same priesthood anymore. But our belief is that somewhere between the time of the apostles and the making of the creeds in the 3rd, 4th centuries, that actual priesthood authority was lost. And the only kind of scriptural support for that, we just believe it because that was revelation to Joseph Smith. But the scriptural support is in 2 Thessalonians, Paul says that there's going to be a falling away before the coming of Christ. There will be a falling away from, and that the devil's put on the throne in the church kind of thing. Not that we think the Pope is the devil, but some Latter-day Saints might, but that's not doctrine. But then in John's Revelation, the Revelation of St. John. I'm sure you're very familiar with.
Oh yeah, definitely. All these people I know. Yep.
Anyway, he had a revelation some years after when he was on the island of Patmos that sort of covers the whole of God's plan. sets out the whole thing in a wide variety of images. One of the images is the woman bearing a child fleeing into the wilderness. And so for me, as I was trying to coordinate between the prophecies of what we call the Old Testament, and the New Testament, and our understanding from contemporary revelation, I believe that's an image of the church, the woman, and the child, the priesthood, being taken away, going into the wilderness to be protected from the dragon that probably is mostly Europe. But that idea that God preserved his church and priesthood for later restoration.
Oh, okay.
So we don't believe other Christians are bad, and we believe they're real Christians, and the spiritual gifts are evident in all that they do. But in terms of the fullness of God's doctrine and authority, we believe was restored to Joseph Smith.
I see.
And then we're still figuring it out from there. And as our church leaders like to say, the restoration is ongoing, and we're still learning. And what we've learned, I think, most critically over the last 30 years, 40, 50 years maybe, since 1978 in particular, is that the church has made some serious wrong turns occasionally. Maybe I made that sound worse than it is. But one in particular was very bad with our history of racism, where the blacks were excluded from the priesthood and from temples. That was just, we accept that was wrong. There was not even a misinterpretation of Scripture, but there was an application of Scripture in order to justify racism. And it was simply wrong, and something the church has had to repent of. But so I think we were recognizing more and more at this period of time that when we talk about the restoration being ongoing, that includes correcting our own errors, not just correcting the rest of Christianity's errors. Yeah. Right? So we're learning, we're growing up as a church, right? The Catholic Church has had nearly 2,000 years of growing, so in some ways they're more mature than us, even though we think they have some of the doctrine wrong. So we're learning.
That's interesting. That's great. It's always interesting to hear about how things are changing.
Yeah. And it's, I'm finding, I've been reading a lot lately from some Latter-day Saint historians and theologians, and we are not a theologian-driven church. The church is very much driven by revelation and inspiration, and we rely on that more. But right now we seem to have a little hotbed of scholars who are not only scholarly but also deeply spiritual, and their understanding of the gospel is very enriching. So I can see changes coming, not in the sense that the church will necessarily change its structure and core beliefs will be what they are, but our understanding of what those core beliefs mean for us and for our part in the history of the world is growing. We're in the dynamic period.
That's pretty cool to be witnessing that. That's neat. That's good. So is there anything, sort of a last thought that you want to share with the folks at home, or you're thinking, I really want to talk about this thing?
No, not right. I mean, if I picked one, I'd be wrong. I think one of the questions that was on the sheet was, what would you want people to understand about your faith? I think I'd go back to that point that we are Christian. In some ways it's a little bit defensive and unnecessarily defensive for us to keep saying that, but we spend a lot of decades, because we're only a couple hundred years old, but we spend a lot of time being told we're not. What we are not are mainstream Christians. What we are not are Christians who rely on the creeds of the councils of Nicaea and so forth, right? That's not where our doctrine comes from. Our doctrine comes from revelation from God to Joseph Smith, and then turning back to the scriptures, the Bible in particular, to understand that, in the Book of Mormon to add to that. But in terms of a devotion to Christ and a reliance on His grace, His power, His direction, that He is the center of all things, the Creator, the Father, the Judge, the Son, all those things, that is the center of everything to us. And so in recent years, the church has said, stop using that Mormon word. Mormon is the name of a prophet who wrote a book. That's who he is, and we like him. We like the book quite a lot. But it is the church of Jesus Christ. And in some ways, you can always think, that's just sort of PR. They're just trying to look more Christian. But when you really understand our scriptures and our doctrine and what we teach and talk about together, that is everything to us. He is everything to us. And so you can disagree with us about the nature of the Trinity and whether Jesus has a body now or all that. We can all disagree on those technicalities of doctrine, but I think the idea that some people have that we're not Christian is just wholly not getting it. Just I don't think I've ever seen an organization that I could say is absolutely without question Christian as much as I would say of the church. There are individuals all around the world in all different faiths who are, deeply Christian or whatever they are. But the church as an organization is about as Christ-centered as you can get. And I, as I've come to know and love Christ more, that's been very important to me.
For sure. Well, that makes sense. I mean, when you first sort of told me, like, oh, it's not Mormon anymore, I've been like, okay, LDS, I can remember that. And yeah, I think it's just respectful to call people how they identify.
Well, that's right. Yeah, this is the perfect time in history for us to do that, right? We identify as the Church of Jesus Christ.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, Michael, thank you so much for being on the show. It's been a delight to talk to you and to learn a bit more.
Thank you.
And thank you all for joining us today. We'll see you next time on Believe It or Not. Oh, that was interesting. What happened in 1978?
It's funny because I mentioned it and then I forgot that I mentioned it. 1978 was the year that the church officially ended.